Hello! This is the Sharp PC1500 pocket computer, and it's connected to the Sharp CE-150 printer and cassette interface, which can produce printouts like this, using a 4-colour plotter. In this video, I'd like to cover how to make replacement pens for this plotter. If I open the lid here, you can see that it contains one of these fairly standard Alps miniature plotter mechanisms that can take 4 pens in this little carriage here, and it moves the pens over the paper here to produce the printouts. Now, I don't have any of the original pens for this plotter, which meant that when it came to using it, I had to find a solution to that. Now, there is a company in Germany that makes modern replacements, however these are quite expensive. So what I did instead was take a look at the service manual for the plotter, which contains the specifications of the pens. They are ballpoint pens with a 5mm diameter and a 23.3mm length, and they use a watercolour-based ink. Now, I think the watercolour-based ink is quite important because this does not put a lot of pressure on the pens as it moves them over the surface of the paper to print, so you need something that's going to write smoothly and easily. Your bog standard, common or garden variety ballpoint pen is not going to cut it. However, what should do the trick, and what indeed does do the trick, are these gel pens. In particular, these ones I have found have almost perfect dimensions on the refills inside and are quite easy to modify for use in this plotter mechanism. Now, these I bought from Poundland for 75p. That gets you 3 of these blue pens, which is great if you need the blue pens and you live in the UK, but if you don't, then fortunately the same pens, or at least extremely similar ones, can be found on AliExpress. So not only are they available in blue, but they come in black and red as well. And you can also buy the individual refills for these pens, which makes life even easier when it comes to chopping these up to fit them inside the plotter mechanism. You don't even need to unscrew the pens, you can just start from the refills all ready to go. Now, this is a 4-colour plotter, and you can see here I'm only showing you 3 coloured pens, and that's because I haven't been able to find green ink refills in this format. However, on AliExpress you can also find these erasable 5-colour pens, or well, they're 4 different coloured pens, but they've also got a propelling pencil in the middle. But what's really important to us is the fact that it does have the elusive green gel pen in there. And similar to the other type of pen, you can buy stand-alone refills like this. Now, obviously these are quite different to these refills, so a slightly different process will be required to adapt these to fit in here. However, I will cover the processes for both type of refills shortly. Before I get into that, I just want to quickly demonstrate. This is what we're going to be working towards. These are the little refills that I've made. These do work pretty well. They're all running a bit low. You can see here this green one is almost expired, so this will be a perfect opportunity for me to make a fresh set and show you how I do that. So without further ado, let's get cracking. I mentioned that I thought these refills were a perfect candidate for this project. You can see why if you measure them. If you look at the back here, this tube is about 5mm in diameter, which is exactly what we need the outer diameter of the pen to be. Now, of course, that's the back end of the refill, and what we're really interested in is the business end, the writing end. However, what you can see here is if I uncap that, one fits very neatly into the other, like that. So if we were to cut a length of this plastic tubing here, we can then glue that onto the front there like that, and that would form the body of our pen. Now, of course, as well as the outer diameter of the pen, we need to pay attention to this 23.3mm length. And if I measure the length of the pen from just behind the this outer grey part here, so from here to the end of the pen like that, or thereabouts. Trying to show this on camera. It's not particularly well lined up. It's a bit shorter than that. There we go. But you can see it's about 1mm short. You see we need 23.3mm, and here we've got about 22.2mm. And you see what happens is when we cut the end of this off, there'll be a little exposed hole at the end where the ink could, I suppose, potentially leak out. So we need to cap that. And what we can use to cap that is a bolt like this. These are very small bolts, so small that my camera won't focus on them. There we go. You can see here it's a hex head bolt, and the height of the head is about 1 millimeter. So if I was to screw that into the back of the refill, once I've cut the end of it off, so cut behind the grey part here, and then screw this little bolt in the end there instead, that would plug it neatly. Though, of course, air still needs to get in somehow, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill a hole down the centre of the bolt, as well as cut it slightly shorter, and that should fit in quite nicely. And what I've found is that the inner diameter of these refills accommodates an M2 bolt very nicely. Now, there is one slight caveat, and that's one slight weirdness. You see, I mentioned these 3 coloured refills that you can get in blue, red and black. And the blue one, once you cut the end of it off, the inner diameter is actually slightly wider. It takes about an M2.5 bolt. So that's just one thing to watch out for. Oddly, these ones that I got from Poundland, they fit the same M2 bolt. However, this whole process is a little inexact. You will probably have to do a bit of experimentation to get it working. But what I will show you now is how I get it to work with my pen refills that I've got here. And hopefully that can give you some inspiration on how to make it work for yourself. That's all very well for this style of refill with its 5mm outer diameter. However, what about these skinnier refills? How can we make those fit? Well, one thing we could do is use the tubing from one of the wider, thicker refills and use that to make a 5mm pen body for the skinnier refills, and that would work. However, it could be that you can't source these thicker refills at all, in which case you still need to find some sort of plastic tubing to make this skinny refill about 5mm in diameter. And for that, I would suggest looking under your kitchen or bathroom cupboards and finding something like this. Flash, the saviour of the universe, or in this case, a bleach spray. And if I take the top of the bottle off, we can see that inside there is a bit of plastic tubing. And if I measure that, like so, you can see that it's not quite 5mm, 4.7mm. It's perhaps close enough, it'll do the job. But yes, I would suggest looking around for other household supplies where you might have a piece of plastic tubing that fits. So I would generally recommend these refills because they're already the right 5mm diameter, and you're already having to cut them up to make the actual pen bit of the pen. But if not, there are other alternatives. As far as tools are concerned, you shouldn't need anything too sophisticated. To cut the bolts to length, I like to use one of these high-speed rotary tools alongside a cutting disc. And to drill the air holes down the centre of the trimmed down bolts, you'll probably need something like one of these 0.5mm carbide drill bits. As the bolts are made out of quite hard metal, you'll need some hard drill bits to get through the centre of them. Now, once the plastic pen refills have been cut to size, you might find they're a little too wide at one end and need to be trimmed to size. Now, you can do that by hand using a knife or with a bit of sandpaper. What I like to do is mount the pen inside the high-speed rotary tool and then use a file to shape the end of it. So if you've got some needle files, that can make that job a little easier too. You will, of course, need your usual complement of measuring and marking equipment, but to cut through the plastic tube itself, something like a simple craft knife like this will do the job just fine. However, I personally prefer to start the cut using one of these little miniature pipe cutters because that leaves a nice straight score all the way around the outside of the plastic tube, so that when I then cut through it with the craft knife, I can be sure that it's going to be a nice clean cut. For gluing, some super glue, cyanacrylate, will do the job, though if you're trying to use one of the skinnier pen refills and need a slightly thicker glue to fill the gap, then some 2-part epoxy will also do the job. Now, as we're cutting down these refills, the exposed ends of the refills may start leaking a bit of ink, so what I also like to get is a bit of hot glue just to plug the ends of the tubes as I'm going along. Now, that's completely optional. You could just throw away the offcuts, though if you want to preserve them in the hopes of perhaps refilling the pens you've made using a syringe or something like that, then some hot glue will do a good job of sealing the ends, and then you can pick the glue off when you need to get back at the ink afterwards. Anyway, Let's get cracking with drilling out those, cutting the bolts to length and drilling out the sensors. And to do that, I'll be using one of these high-speed rotary tools. Here are the bolts that I'm going to be cutting to length. I only really need about 2mm of thread on each one to screw into the end of each refill. Now, to grip them when I'm cutting them, I'm actually going to bolt them into this little nut first, and then I'm going to hold the nut in a pair of pliers. Though this is all quite a precarious job when you're using a high-speed cutting disc like this, and in case you lose the parts and they go pinging across the room, definitely wear your safety glasses when doing so. So what I do here is I take the bolt and thread it into the nut. Make sure that's nice and tightly in there. And then I'm going to hold all this in this pair of pliers so I can then cut the end of that bolt off. So there we go, there's the end of one bolt cut off. Now to do the rest of them. Here are the 4 bolts that have now been cut to length, and the next task is to drill a hole down the centre of them to let the air in, and to do that I'm going to be using this 0.5mm carbide drill bit. As before, each bolt is threaded into a nut. That nut is then held in the pair of pliers, and I'm just going to use the drill from the right hand side to carefully drill out the centre of each bolt. Here are the 4 bolts now that they've been cut to length and had air holes drilled down the centre of them, which I personally find to be the most fiddly part of the whole process. So what we're now going to do is something a little easier, and that is cutting off the end of these 5mm diameter refills to get a bit of plastic tubing that can be used as our pen's body. And to do that, I just need to trim each one to about 16mm off the end there. If I mark that on there. And then I'm going to use a pipe cutter to start the cut. If I line that up there, as best I can. There we go. Get that in there, give it a twiddle, slight tighten, give it a twiddle, slight tighten, give it a twiddle, slight tighten. Work my way around. There we go. Now I'm not going to go all the way through because I find that this pipe cutter tends to crush the plastic tubing and leaves it a slightly unfortunate shape. So if I start it like that, and I'm just going to cut through the rest of it with this knife. Oops. Pinged off across the room, but there we go. That is the end of the pen, and now I've got I've done this to 2 other refills already, so now I've got 3 little pieces, all about 16mm in length, and well, I can use these to continue making the pens. Here are the pen bodies that I've cut from the 5mm diameter refills over here. I've cut 4 of them off. I've used 3 refills here. I was able to get 2 off this blue refill over here, and I'm going to use that one for this green refill that doesn't have the 5mm outer diameter that it needs. You can also see that I have capped the ends of all of these with a little blob of hot glue, just to make sure that when I cut from here, the ink doesn't leak out of this central part here. It becomes a bit messy, but by plugging it and stopping the air getting in, it does mean that the ink won't flow out. So the next step is to cut these all to length. These ones are quite easy because I can just get the sharp knife in here between those 2 parts there. I hope you can see that if I bring that up into focus somewhat. But you can see here you've got this sort of grey shoulder here that connects onto this transparent plastic part here. If I get the knife in between the 2 and cut between there, that means that this part here is pretty much the perfect length for our needs. So I shall get cracking with that. Right, so here goes. I'm going to start with the black one, and as mentioned, I need to get the knife between this grey shoulder here and this clear plastic here. I'm going to put the knife in there and cut through to the best of my ability, which as usual is I push the knife in, push down and roll forwards whilst exerting pressure, being very careful of your fingers, of course. And there we go, that is now cut through. You can see here that is the end there, and that is the end there. And so what I'm going to do here first is actually I'm going to take one of my bolts and, oops, there we go, I've lost the hex key off screen for 1 minute, there we go. And I'm just going to take this and I'm going to put that bolt in there, let's tighten that in, and it should thread in quite nicely, there we go, I can feel that going around. Oh, it's squeezing out a bit of ink as we go, there we go. So that's now capped off there. Got a little bit of tissue paper here to clean things up. There we go. And I'm also going to put a little bit of hot glue on the end of there, just like that. There we go, to cap that off and put that to one side for future reference. So there is the first of our pens. I'm just going to mop off the end of that. And now the last one we're going to have to do is the green one, and this one's going to be a bit different because, of course, we don't have that shoulder to aim for. So how long do we need to cut that? Well, therein lies the question. As the whole pen needs to be 23.3 millimeters long, and our bolts are about 1.3 millimeters in size, the head. Your bolts might have different depth heads. In my case, they're 1.3 millimeters. So I need to take 1.3 millimeters off 23.3. So I need to make mine 22 millimeters in length. And so I can do that by lining this up here. Something to line up the end there, like that. Get my pen out. Oops. Get the actual cap off the pen. There we go. I'm just going to cut that at 22 millimeters, like that. And so this time I'm not going to put it in the pipe cutter, I'm just going to line that up on top there. And as before, roll with the pen. Oops. And press down. Oops. And there we go, that's cut through. I would say I'm making a mess of the cutting board, but you can't really tell because it's green on green. Here we go. Get that, get the bolt, put that in there, and screw that on, like that. Oops, there we go. Clean that, and clean that, and bit of hot glue on the end for good measure. There we go. Oops, I'm sure there was bits of green on here. But there are our 4 pens. Without their outer bodies, we need to attach those, but that looks like a good start. According to the service manual, we're aiming for 23.3 millimeter long pens. Now these are going to be perhaps slightly longer because they've still got this cap on, but if I measure that there, you can see that is 23.4 millimeters. That one, 23.4 millimeters. And this has still got its cap on. Oops. 23.3 millimeters without the cap on. And then here, oops, 23 millimeters exactly, that one. So you can see that's why I recommended these pen refills, because they do seem to come out pretty much the exact right length with fairly minimal work. Now the only thing we do need to do is to make these slightly thicker because they're the right length, but they are the wrong diameter. And you can do that by now gluing these into here. See that like that. This green one will need a little bit more work to get that nicely arranged, but we're definitely on the right track. Unfortunately, whilst the length is now spot on, there's a slight problem with diameter. And you can see that if you look at the end of the pen here, where I've cut it off behind that shoulder, it's not actually completely round. It's slightly wider in the horizontal direction in this case than it is tall. And you can see here that it's 5.3 millimeters wide, which is slightly wider than the 5mm tube that it's going to be inserted in. And this can cause problems, because what happens is when the mechanism strikes the pen from behind, that extra bit of width here sometimes makes it stick in the mechanism. And that's no good. It means that either the pen doesn't appear on the page, or the pen gets knocked forwards and gets stuck, and you end up with streaks in the image. So what we need to do is we need to bring this down to 5mm or thereabouts around the outside. And the way that I like to do that is to use this high-speed rotary tool, and I'm going to load the pen into the end of that, like that, and then running it at a low speed, I'm going to shape the end of it with this file, like that, until it's round all the way round. Now you have to be careful when doing this, because as you're holding the file against the pen, it'll get warm, and if you do it for long enough, it'll melt. So I'm going to run this at a low speed, and very carefully just bring that down to the right size. Here is the end of the blue pen after turning it to the right size. I've done the same to the black and the red pen as well, and I also put a little stripe on both of those so I can tell what they were more easily, though it's fairly evident which colour pen is which by looking at the end here. Anyway, those are now the right size. They should no longer get caught in the machine. It's time to glue them up, and also time to glue up the green one. This didn't have that shoulder, so it didn't need to be trimmed to size. That's just ready to go. If your refills have these little red caps on, it's easiest to remove that now, because once you've glued them together, it's going to be a little bit fiddly to get in and remove that. So now I've taken that off there, and here we've got the green one that also has one of these little red caps on. There we go, and that also can just be picked off with your fingernails. Much easier when you can actually get your fingernails around the pen. There we go, so that's now cleaned up. These are now all ready to glue up. For these three pens, because they've got this shoulder on them, I can use a bit of cyanoacrylate superglue to secure them. Now, this won't actually fully bond them. I think this is all made of polypropylene, which cyanoacrylate won't actually bond to, but it will hold them securely enough for the pens to work. It does also have the advantage that if I need to adjust anything in future, it's quite easy to just pop these refills out of their outer tubes, make the adjustment, and then glue them back together. This glue can just be picked off very easily. But anyway, here we go. I'm going to start with this one. Get the super glue open. And here I'm just going to remove a bit of hair off the end of there, apparently. There you go. I'm just going to a little bit of super glue on the end of a cocktail stick, like that. Just going to then transfer that to the refill there. Pop that out of the way. And then I'm just going to drop that down the inside of that, like that. Push it on. And remove the excess with a little cloth. I was about to use my fingers, but just use a bit of cloth to remove tissue rather, to remove the excess, make sure that's on there. And there we go, there's one. Now move on to the next. Think we're pretty much done with those. Just give them a little more time to set, and we can concentrate on the green one. That's the more difficult one to do. For this final green pen, I'm going to use some of this 2-part epoxy resin to glue it into its outer tube. So I'm just going to decant a little bit of this. There's the resin. And then here is the hardener. And I'm doing this on a polypropylene yogurt pot lid, which is why I think this here is also made of polypropylene, because the epoxy will not bond to this yogurt pot. However, as long as there's a sort of a mechanical plug that will hold this inside here, and it should do the trick. It doesn't need to be a particularly strong bond, just so that it's held in there. And then what I'm going to do here, just apply some of this to here. I'll make quite a bit more of that. There we go. That one there. Put that down, and now, without gluing it to your fingers, let's see, is this a good idea to hold that on there? Yes. There we go. So here I'm just using the string of glue hanging off there. Right, and then that can go in here. I'm just going to twist it around a bit. Make sure that there is a bit of a blob of glue all around there. And there we go, that's now in there. Now that the glue has dried on our replacement pens, it's time for a test fit. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to open up the plotter here to gain access to the mechanism. And I'm going to switch it into the pen change mode, which you do by holding 0 and pressing paper feed button. And that sends the carriage over to the right hand side, so I can try inserting each pen in turn into the carriage. So here's one, it goes in like that. And well, the first thing I notice is that the plastic outer part here extends perhaps 1 millimetre further than I'd be happy with. See, this clear plastic here is sticking out beyond this ring here. And in my experience, if it does that, it means it can jam when the carriage is rotating and changing pens. So I'm not going to try to load the other pens in at the moment, but I will bear in mind that this black one needs about 1 millimetre to be shaved off the front of it. Now, it's always better to have a pen that's too long rather than too short, because you can always trim the pen, but you can't easily add extra length to it. And there we go, that also sticks a little further forwards than I perhaps would like, so I'll try to cut another millimetre off that one. Oops. It helps if you pull the pen eject lever and not the back of the solenoid there. Let's try the green one next. That slides into there. That's an easier fit than the others, but I suppose it does have a different end on it. Again, that's sticking forwards perhaps an extra millimetre, so I'll trim that 1 millimetre. Oops. And then finally the red one, that fits in there like that. And again, that also needs about 1 millimetre shaved off the front of it, which I suppose makes sense. I did cut all of these tubes to the same length. They're all perhaps 1 millimetre too long. But yes, okay, so before I load these all 4 in and get it spinning around, because I have a hunch that that might actually jam the mechanism, I'm going to trim these all by 1 millimetre. And to do that, I'm going to use my pipe cutter, because it makes that a little bit easier. And I'll show you how I'm doing that next. So here I've got one of the pens that's slightly too long loaded into the pipe cutter. I'm just going to use that to score the end of it like that. Slightly tighten, slightly tighten, slightly tighten. And this will just shave a little ring off the end of it off. Like that. And once I've got enough of that started, I can use the sharp knife to finish the cut off. As before, there we go. Doesn't take much. Just part that off like that. And there we go. That pen is now slightly shorter and so should fit into the printer mechanism a little more easily. Now that I've trimmed about 1mm off all 4 pens, I feel a bit more comfortable about loading them all into the carousel at once. So I'm back in the pen change mode, and the first pen to go in is the black one. And if I click that in, you should hopefully be able to see it no longer protrudes beyond this white plastic ring there. There we go. Advance to the next pen, which is the blue one, like that. And then the green one, like that. And finally the red one, like that. And then I press clear and the paper feed button. And there we have the entire carousel filled. I'm just going to advance the paper a little, like that. Oops. Get that through there. Close the lid, and I'm going to wind the paper back a little, like that. And now comes the moment of truth. If I run a test, what happens? Black, blue, green, and red. All 4 printed beautifully. And if I now type hello, like that, there we go. So there are the 4 pens loaded in. That seems to be working pretty well. Hopefully this video has been useful. If you have either this CE-150 specifically or just some other device that contains this Alps plotter mechanism, finding the replacement pens is rather difficult. That's why I've come up with this way of making my own. They don't last particularly long, I found, and I haven't found a good way to refill them. I have been keeping all the old cut-offs with a hope that I might be able to take the ink out of these and somehow put them into the little pens that I've made. However, when using a syringe, the syringe I've got has much too broad a diameter, and you tend to just end up with a massive air bubble in the pen end, and it doesn't print at all, which is a bit useless. However, yes, thank you very much for watching this video. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know below. Otherwise, see you in the next one. Cheers.